We're going back to the future this week, and we're going to be talking about behavioral finance in the old school way. How do you think about it, and what kind of books can you read if you want to learn more? This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision-making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. On Thursday, we spoke with Merle van den Akker, who is an expert in behavioral psychology, behavioral finance with a PhD, and she's an academic working in a financial institution in Australia. And it was a fabulous discussion because we got a chance to talk about some of the things that we talked about when this podcast got started. Behavioral decision-making and the genesis of behavioral economics and how people go about making better wealth decisions and what sorts of things they should be aware of, what their behavioral biases are, and what can be done to overcome them. So I thought it would be useful to spend some time talking about the books that are available for those people who actually want to learn more. It's the summertime. People want to do some summer reading. So Merle and I spoke about two books on the podcast that we just finished a few days ago. The first is Thinking Fast and Slow. It came out in 2010 or 2011, I believe. It was a runaway bestseller. It was written by Daniel Kahneman, Kahneman, who was a professor emeritus at Princeton, who just died in 2024. It's a fascinating book. It's jam-packed with just dozens of examples of how people make choices that are not always in their best interest. Something called heuristics, a lot of examples of how people make snap decisions based on a system one, where you make a decision quickly and easily, as opposed to being contemplative and using a system two to actually stop and think and be deliberative about what you're doing and why it is you're doing it. So that would be probably the best book that I could recommend in terms of if you want to do a deep dive into behavioral economics. If you want something a little bit lighter, I can recommend two books by Richard Thaler. Thaler's also a Nobel laureate. He wrote one book called Misbehaving, which is a summary of how behavioral economics has evolved over the past number of decades. And he talks about all the heavyweights, including himself and Kahneman and Tversky, but a number of others, the insights that have been gained along the way, and how behavioral economics engaged in what might be called intellectual warfare with traditional economics, because traditional economics takes it as a given that people are well-informed, self-interested actors who will make decisions that are best for them simply because that's a reasonable assumption to make. One of the great things about Misbehaving is that it shows in multiple examples how people don't make decisions in their own best interest and oftentimes will continue to make those mistakes even as they're shown the error of their way. The other book written by Richard Thaler is actually co-written by Thaler along with another guy named Cass Sunstein, is a book called Nudge, which came out maybe 15 years ago. And it talks about choice architecture and the idea of how people can make better decisions by being nudged into how the choices are presented to them so that they can hopefully make decisions that are more in their self-interest. The comment that is used to describe it is libertarian paternalism. The book is a proponent of libertarianism, which is we're not going to tell you what to do, but as a paternalistic set of people who think they know better than what's best for you, they will nudge you to do things that they think are best. If you're indifferent, then you might not even realize that you're being nudged, and you will hopefully make a better choice. An example would be putting all the healthy food at the beginning of a cafeteria so that when you get your tray, you're loading up with apples and salads so that you don't have the French fries, burgers, and the desserts because they're at the end and you've already bought enough food because you bought the healthy stuff first. All the food is available at any point in time. You can get whatever you want, but by putting the healthy stuff first, you're likely to put that on your plate first and therefore not have any room at the end of the day. The last book that I want to talk about is a book called Predictably Irrational. Here's a copy. It came out also about 10 or 15 years ago, written by Dan Ariely, who's a prof over at Duke University in the US. He's also the founder of a company called BE Works, and we've had some BE Works people that have been guests on this podcast as well. He shows, and the book is actually uproariously funny, as is Misbehaving, in my opinion. It's a great read if you want to sit down and just learn stuff, but you don't even realizing that you're learning stuff because it's so entertaining about how people predictably make irrational choices. That's going to sound a bit counterintuitive, but the fact of the matter is there's a ton of research that shows that people make mistakes that are irrational. And even when it's pointed out to them they're irrational, they make the mistakes all over again. So if you're thinking about reading something this summer and you can't decide what you want to read, any book about behavioral economics is the intersection of economics, if you want to learn more about economics, and psychology. If you have any interest in human psychology whatsoever, these two things come together in behavioral economics. They're a lot of fun, and I would strongly encourage you to do some reading for your own this summer, if you have the time, to learn more about behavioral economics and how it can affect you. This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.